Welcome to This Week from the Principal's Desk, a podcast about Lutheran schools and their leadership. My name is Rob Lunak, and I'm the superintendent of Lutheran Neighborhood Schools in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And my co-host is Mike Sheeman.
My name is Mike Sheeman, and I'm principal at Bethany Lutheran School in Parma, Ohio. And today, Rob and I are going to kind of dive into a topic that is somewhat hard to define, but at the same time not, but one that I think we need to talk about on a regular basis. We're going to talk a lot today about school culture. There's so many different definitions of culture. And I think even before you dive in further, maybe you want to pause this for a second and just ask yourself, or come in with a preconceived notion of, what do you see is school culture? What defines school culture? And Rob and I hope to unpack that a little bit, maybe in our conversation. But I'm kind of hoping by the end of this that you might be able to put your finger on what the culture of your school is, and make that something that can be marketed, that can be shared, or something that maybe you need to work on changing. And then maybe walking out of here with some ideas on what you can do to shape your school's culture, because every person in a school plays a huge part in defining the culture of that place. From, yes, the administrator, but to the teachers and the office staff and the janitorial staff and your lunch ladies, and everybody in that building contributes to the culture of the school. So we hope to unpack that a little bit today. Rob, if I was going to throw that question at you, how would you define it? What is school culture?
That is such a tough one, because it's something that we talk about all the time, and it's something that, people will walk in your building and they'll say, oh, I love the feel of the place here. And so for a lot of people, culture's like the weather. It's something that you can describe and it's something you live in, but not a lot of people can look at it and say, well, here's the decisions we can make to guide or shape our culture. It just kind of is what it is a lot of places. If you have a good one, if you have a bad one. And if you have a good one, a lot of the time people go, well, we just really like each other. And if you have a bad one, a lot of the time people go, well, we don't really get along. But people haven't found a way to guide and shape and shift that. And that's part of what we're going to talk about today, is how do you take it from something that is almost out of your control, and how do you make it so it is 100% in your control? Because at the end of the day, as the building leader, there is no one else fully responsible for building culture except you. Everyone else plays a little part, but that has to stop with somebody, and you're the person that stops with. While doing research for this episode last night, sitting on my couch, I was looking up different definitions of building culture. We got feel of the building, decisions people make when there isn't a rule about what to do. This next one I found that I like: culture is the organization's immune system. Kind of like that analogy that, it protects you from things that are happening around you that maybe don't fit. And then I was trying to put my own spin on it. So culture is the story people tell about your school. That's my version of it. So when people come and visit your school and they go and tell other people what you're like, they're really describing your culture. Well, they really love kids. They're really nice. They're always making the right decisions. They're describing your culture. They're putting words to it that maybe you wouldn't have been able to put to it. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. And I love some of these quotes that you came up. It is story. Culture really is story. And one of the things that's important to recognize early on is your school has a culture. It is there. The question is, can you, as the administrator, can you define it? And if you can't, if somebody were to say to you, what is your school's culture? One thing I'd encourage you to do is get out and start talking to people. What are the feels that you get in this place? And you might get a lot of different answers to questions like that. You'll have to frame it in your context, but does the school need to be painted because it looks run down? That feeds into your culture. Do you tend to patch things rather than repair things, or that plays into your school's culture? I was just talking to an administrator that said, we just felt so blessed because we got some money and we were able to fully repave our parking lot, which is something we've not done in a long time. We just kept patching the thing. Well, are you a patch culture, or are you a fix and replace culture? Because you have one, but then the other question is the culture that you feel you have really your culture? And that's where you need to get out and talk to people. Ask your students, how does this place make you feel? What do you like about your school? What are some things that if they went away from our school, you would really miss? And I have a feeling they're not going to talk about page 74 in your math textbooks. They're going to be talking about things like a field day or things like maybe field trips, or for us at Bethany, we have a menu item on the lunch I can never touch because our school loves their Italian dippers. It's cultural for us. So what are those cultural things for you? And not only asking the students, ask the teachers, ask the parents, ask your church members. And I'd be curious to see, do those responses align? Because if they do, I would say your culture is really clearly defined. And if they don't, or if it's uncertain, like Rob said, you've got work to do as an administrator. Because not only is it the end of the day your responsibility to create and define it, it's also your responsibility to model it.
Yeah, I was listening to an audiobook last night on my way home from work, and they were telling a story about a company that their culture was that everything took a long time because they were very methodical, very thorough. And they had one part of their organization that they said, you know what, that hasn't been working. Can you guys test kind of a different version? Can we try to do things faster, still living up to the same standards we did? And they made mechanical equipment like grinders and things. And so they were supposed to make a new product, and it had a metal case on it versus a plastic case. And they're like, well, which one should we test? Which one should we go with? We have to figure out which one's best. And the way they would have traditionally done it is they would have gone through all the scientific tests you could have possibly gone through, and it would have taken a decade to fully test everything out so they knew exactly what to do. But knowing that they had kind of, in order to do things faster and still up to that same standard, try and shift the culture just a little bit, a nudge in a different direction. They said, well, why don't we make two prototypes? We'll make one out of the metal we want to try. We'll make one out of the plastic we want to try. And we'll tie both of them to the back of a car. And we'll drive around the parking lot and see what happens. And they did that until the cop showed up and said, you need to stop driving around with these grinders hanging off the back of your car. It's dangerous. And they took the plastic one and they took the metal one, and they found that the plastic one held up just as well as the metal one, even though it was cheaper and easier to produce. And so they, through that little bit of nudging, shifted their culture just a little bit in a different direction. And that's something you as a leader have the power to do in your building. If you have a culture that's not exactly where you want it to be, you can give people little nudges that way. And it's as simple as the things that you recognize are the things that get repeated. The behaviors and decisions people make that you want them to make more of, you just need to recognize those publicly. And we as leaders get so caught up in putting out fires in our day and going over board meetings in our head and writing out curriculum and planning other things that we forget to do that because we think, well, people are doing the thing they're supposed to be doing. Do I need to tell them good job? They're already doing the right thing. Why do they need to hear about it? Well, I'm here to tell you, as someone who's poor at giving praise himself, yes, they need to hear about it. Especially if that's something you want to build in your culture, you need to be the person to do it. And if that is not your natural default setting, it's going to feel really awkward. And you might think, oh, they can tell that I don't really mean it. Well, you got to mean it. Don't say it if you don't mean it, but you need to convince yourself that you mean it, especially if it's important for your culture and you want to nudge it a little bit in that direction. And this could be anything. Maybe you have a culture where people are late to devotions every morning. How do you fix that? Maybe you have a culture where people don't really share ideas and you need to fix that. Maybe you have a culture where everyone is so pleasant and so kind, but not everybody has the hard conversations they need to have. And maybe you need to fix that. And that starts with you. And you don't have to do all that work alone, but you have to be the first person to start it. Bring people along with you, absolutely. But you have to be willing to do all that work too if you want other people to do it. I think it's the last statistic I heard on building leadership is the average person in a principal position lasts about 3 years in a building. That's the average. And what happens is people go in and that you have your honeymoon that first year, and then you get to like February and you go, oh, well, this isn't great and this isn't great and the building's not quite the way I want. And a lot of people will resign themselves to the fact that they can't fix it and they move on. Well, I'm here to tell you that it is fixable, but that doesn't mean it's easy, and that doesn't mean that everybody finishes that journey with you. Part of being a leader is sometimes moving people on, right? And bringing new people in, and that does a lot to change a culture as well. Mike, what would you say would be maybe the easiest little thing somebody could do to nudge their culture in a better direction?
rewind this podcast about 2 minutes and listen to what you just said all over again. You hit so many things in there that were spot on about culture. So where does culture really need to jump from is from your organization's mission. And like you just said, Rob, I mean, sometimes maybe if people aren't going to buy into that culture, they might not be the right person for that position. And if you want anybody wants a story about that, email me and I can tell you stories about that. It is not easy, but God never said that ministry would be easy, but he said that he would be faithful. So let me case study this for you for a little bit. I shared on one previous episode about mission, our mission statement here at Bethany, and we just had a drastic overhaul. And it was the most fun experience that we could have had as a staff. And fun and mission don't always align in the same sentence, but this one did. And we collaborated. Our mission here at Bethany is love Jesus, love learning, love others, where we unpack that. And we said, what that means for us is as a staff, we're going to be face to face and have hard conversations. We're going to be back to back, speak well of one another when we're not in the room, and we're going to be side by side and conveying the same message, walking together in unity. And that was all well and good on paper, but what excited me and what made me realize that God had blessed this is our staff now have been having some hard conversations that have needed to happen, but they approach one another. And because I've had to model this already, approaching people and say, hey, listen, we need to have a face-to-face conversation. And they understand what face-to-face means. They understand how it ties to our conversation. And they understand that even in the midst of a conflict that may be on the horizon, I love them. I've got their back, and I'm going to speak publicly of them. That created a culture for us where we don't run away from hard conversations. We don't run away from those things where this is really bothering us. Well, I'm just going to sweep it under the rug and move forward. It is what it is. No, the stakes here are too high. The stakes are souls. And when you put it in that perspective, it's so important for us to be able to align a culture that creates a healthy environment where people are heard, people's ideas are expressed, and they know that they're valued. So I would encourage you really to take a look strategically at how is your culture an offshoot of your mission? How does it flow directly from your mission into your building, into the actions of those around you? So take a look at those things, and then, like we said before, modeling that is so vital. I had to go to some staff and say, hey, listen, we need to have a face-to-face, and they got it. And we've created the road to make this a healthier culture than what we were. Culture is always growing. It's always morphing. And it can always be better. So if you think you have a healthy culture, praise God for that. But then make sure that you're investing in it to keep it healthy. You don't want to just have it accidentally slip down the garden path.
Yeah, I like that comment about it flowing from your mission statement, because it absolutely should, because you as an organization should be consistent and should be predictable. And people want to know what they're going to get. Nobody's going to enroll their kid in your school unless they know what product they're going to get out, right? People don't often take chances on their child's education, especially when there's money involved, right? You have people's children, people's checks, and people's faith involved in your school. And those are all three things people love to fight about. So no one's going to take a chance on it if they're not sure what they're going to get. And so having everything flow from that mission statement and having it so people can tell that to parents. So when a parent comes in and they meet the teacher on the tour and they ask the teacher, hey, can you explain a little bit about how everything goes on? That teacher can tell a story not just about their classroom, but about the school, and those align. Because the teacher past the tour is going to be the main contact for that family. Yes, maybe your admissions person is the first one, maybe you as the principal are the first one, but after that, they're going to interact day to day with that teacher. And so that teacher needs to know that and needs to be able to share that and needs to feel confident that they know what the mission is and they know their place in the culture and they know their role in shaping and building and maintaining that. And so often as principals, we like to put ourselves in charge of everything. And here's going to be some hard truth for some principals listening. We like to put ourselves in charge of everything and take responsibility for nothing. We've all been there where we said, oh, I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this. And then it goes wrong. And we have plenty of excuses about why it wasn't our problem. It wasn't our fault that it didn't go well. I told everybody, they just didn't do it. Well, at the end of the day, like we've been saying, it stops and starts with you. So let's say you are new to a building. They have an existing culture that was there before you got there. And if you're new, what is your place in that? What do you think, Mike?
Well, that's a really good question. I think when you're looking at a school, or if you have a call or a position that you're considering, you do want to ask a lot of cultural questions because you need to make sure that you're going to a place where you can do one of two things. I think either jump in full with 2 feet into the culture that they have, or see a path to maybe working with people to adjust culture if need be. But if a school really stands for something that you're going, nah, I just can't see myself in there, don't go there. It's you just can't. You don't want to marry a woman for the woman she's going to become in 10 years after you change her. That's just the way marriages go. But I also think too, the other thing that you're looking at is, Rob, you had a good point. It's the admission director to the principal or whomever to the teacher. But let's extend that even further. The person that a student is going to interact most with during the day are the other students. So then the question becomes, how do you intentionally build that culture in and among the students? So as your job as the administrator is to model and work with your teachers, you need to feel comfortable that they are modeling and working with their students so that the culture flows into the people that happens on the playground when the teacher isn't looking, or in the change room in the gym, or wherever that people feel that the culture of their school, what they sent their kids to be a part of, is what's actually happening. And sometimes that can be hard with students. Sometimes you need to make sure you have the right students in the seats. And I know that's a hard one for admin because you're thinking, well, if I have to get rid of a student, that's that there go my metrics. My enrollment goes down, my finances go down, and uh-oh. But I'm going to flip that and say, if you don't deal with that, your enrollment will go down, your finances will go down, because you've got to stand for something, and your culture is really a clear document, a clear living and breathing feel of what you stand for. So it really does determine the success of a school if you can define and live within the culture that God has called you to be a part of.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that your culture will never be better than the worst things you accept. And so you can be aspirational about it, but if you're going to allow things to go on in your building that you go, well, that's counter to our culture, and you don't do anything to fix it, well, then that's your culture now. Whether you want it to be or not, if you allow those things to happen, that is now your culture. And I know some of our schools are very numbers driven. Some of them have to be. Some of them it's a survival thing. They have to be numbers driven because that's what pays the bills. And you don't want to go to somebody in April and be like, hey, I know you've been doing great, but do you need to get paid in May? Right?
Oops.
You never want to have that conversation. But I would argue that for every hard conversation you have like that, you're actually going to increase your enrollment, and you're going to attract people who more align with what you're doing, and everything's going to get just a little bit easier every time you have those conversations, even though they're hard, even though they're difficult. Nobody wants to be the person that gets the reputation of, well, Timmy sneezed and Johnny didn't say God bless you, so we kicked Johnny out of school. Like no one wants that reputation. That's an extreme example. If you have a kid named Timmy or Johnny, I'm sorry. It's an example, okay? I don't want to offend anybody. So one of the things I would always do, new to a staff, new to a building, or even at the beginning of every year, is a little bit of team building. Because you can have a building where everybody's been there 20 years, but that doesn't mean they've spent a lot of time together. Especially if you have multiple floors in your building, the people upstairs don't often talk to the people downstairs unless they all need to be in the same room together for something. Maybe that's devotions, maybe they have a shared lunch, maybe they're on a committee together. But a lot of the time, the first grade teacher and the seventh grade teacher don't interact a whole bunch. And we're all nice Christian people, so we'll go, oh, well, they're nice. But that's about as far as we get, right? So we need to be built on a little deeper level than that. I would always pair up mentors, elementary to middle school, even if they had both been there like 30 years. I'm like, hey, your buddy now is this person, and we're going to build in time where you guys can go talk to each other. And that has saved so many little cultural problems. Like, seventh grade teacher met with the first grade teacher, and the first grade teacher's like, hey, I know we've been meeting for a long time, and that's been great, but your class is a little loud when they pass my door on the way to lunch. And the guy's like, we're not any louder than we've been for like 15 years. And she's like, I know.
Yep, that's the point.
Building that bridge, getting people comfortable talking to each other, and being able to share in love, like, hey, here are the ideals of our culture, and right now I don't think you're meeting that, and I can tell you that because I have a relationship with you now. So that team building piece is so important. And you're never going to find a team building thing teachers like. And I will tell you that if you put team building at the beginning of the year, you will hear this comment: I just want time in my classroom, because they do, but they're both equally important. So you gotta weigh that balance. And also, anytime you plan something as a principal, not every teacher is gonna love it, and so you just gotta let some of that roll off your back. Like, oh, they didn't like this activity. Okay, well, do you like every staff meeting you've run as a principal? No. Okay, you're gonna you're gonna have to get used to that one and accept that one. Now, Mike, you do some really cool things at your school with culture building and team building with your students. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that we tend to do, but again, looking at the student experience, I think is so important. So actually, I'm just getting ready. We take our entire middle school off to a camp for a couple of days. We're in the second week of school, and we do it right now. So Thursday, Friday this week, we're taking our kids a 3 hour drive up to Buffalo, New York, and we're going to be doing some team building with the kids there. We always, like you said, Rob, I start every year with team building with the staff. I'm blessed to have a staff that love it. But then we're going to do that with the kids as well, setting expectations. But we're going to do so in an environment where it's not a classroom, so there's it's still structured, but we can kind of let our hair down a little bit to be able to say, let's just talk about these things. What are your guys' fears? What are your anticipations, your anxieties? What are those things that are there? So I think that's something that I learned from a very wise teacher friend of me at a different school that I stole and brought here. But I think those kinds of culture building experiences are good. I know a lot of our schools do things like buddy programs with the older grades buddying up with the younger grades, chapel families. I hear a lot of those kinds of student experiences, because we always talk about our schools as families. We're a family. Well, okay, but in family, we know one another. So how are we intentionally getting to know the people that God has placed in our classroom? Because the one reality, and this can be sometimes a little tricky to accept, is people are always watching. Now that can be intimidating, but if you say you stand for something and then you don't act in accordance with that, that's going to be the message that's sent out about your school. If you have, all the way to a very silly example, if you have parking lot routines set up and somebody turns into the parking lot the wrong way and you see that, are you going to go and approach that car? Or are you going to just let it go because you know that the car behind is watching and they know that they did that wrong? So part of the culture is holding people accountable, but I think people appreciate that. I think if I use the parking lot example because it happened this morning, and when I approached that parent, he said, "Yeah, I was confused. I didn't know. Thank you for clarifying." And I didn't go and say, "You did it wrong." It was just, this is what happened. We just need you to adjust. So but had I not done that, I would have affirmed for everybody that they could have done whatever they wanted. I mean, it's a silly example that really does paint a bigger picture, though. People are watching. And so being true to what you say and true to the culture that you want to set is critical.
Yeah, everyone in your school plays a role of protecting that culture. It is that important. That goes down to, if a kid does something rude, somebody in love calls him out on it, right? You apologize when you do wrong. If a teacher makes a mistake, they apologize about it. They model what love and truth and culture look like in your building, and you as a principal model that. And even parents at sporting events, I'll go up to, I don't know what it is about middle school basketball in the Midwest. People get real chippy real quick, and I don't understand it, especially when you get like playoffs, right? And I'll go up to a parent, like, "Hey, I'm glad you're cheering for your kid, but you can't cheer against the other team. Sorry." Right? No, you can't heckle the kid shooting the free throw. It's not allowed, right? And it's unfortunate that sometimes we need to have those conversations. And I think as Lutheran school leaders, we get a little discouraged when we see that. So it's easier to not do anything about it. It's easier than confronting it, because that means that we don't need to recognize it as real and happening a lot of the time. And yes, it would be easier in the short term to just ignore some of those things, but you are just creating bigger problems for yourself in the long term. And so much of leading a building is maintaining things and building things better than they currently are, whether they're good or bad to begin with. Things can always get better, but that is constant work. It's like cutting your grass. You can't cut it once and then be done. You have to do it every year. And then, oh, there are weeds again. How'd that happen? I pulled them all out last year. Why are there more of them? And some years are worse than others, and some years are easier than others. But that is the role that you've been called into. You are supposed to care for and tend and nurture and grow the culture of your school. Mike, we have covered so much that I think it might be a little overwhelming. Is there anything else we need to cover, or is this probably a good spot? Give people some time to digest. Maybe we'll go into a part 2 later about maybe some of the more practical stuff.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, Rob, I think we scared everybody because we basically said you need to do the hard things, which it's true. But we're in Lutheran school ministry. And like I said before, God never said it would be easy. But when you're struggling with culture, have some open conversations with people. You have people in your school that you can talk to, but also you have outside resources. You have ed execs, you have friends at other schools, you have people that you can talk to just to run ideas off of. Even if it's the worst idea in the world, that's okay. You've got people there who are there to support you. And most importantly, go back to scripture, because every day we should be in God's word, because we are under the attacks of the evil ones. That's scriptural too. But to be able to say, live in his promises. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. Our days are his. They are his days, and his mercies are new to us every morning. So continue to live in those promises. And as culture seems like a really steep hill with an avalanche coming straight at you, Philippians 4:13, you can do all things through Christ who gives you strength. So stay strong. It's for the ministry that you've been called to be a part of.
Good words, Mike. Good words. Can I take the prayer this time?
You're up.
Dear Lord, thank you for our Lutheran schools and our ministries. Thank you for the people that you've placed in those with us and for the work that you've put before us. Please allow us to strengthen our cultures and to strengthen our missions. Please allow us to do the hard things, even though they are hard. Allow us to find joy in all the work that you've given us. Please bless us as we begin our school years and as we build those cultures, build those teams, and continue to do the great work you've put before us. In your son's name we pray. Amen.